one of the reasons I might not initially invest in the SpaceX IPO is because Starship is not commercially operational. It's currently in the research and development phase. And I do understand that vehicle could still be used internally in terms of the deployment of Starlink infrastructure in space. But what would convince me as a potential investor would be a fully operational Starship that's launching at a cadence equivalent to the current Falcon 9 fleet, or launching even more often. SpaceX is going to go through the largest IPO ever at anywhere from $1.75 to $2 trillion valuation. And I remember around 9 or 10 years ago when I started following the company, the first video I saw from SpaceX wasn't a launch or anything like that. It was a CGI render of the Big Falcon Rocket, the BFR, which was the predecessor to Starship. It was the initial concept that Starship was born out of. And I remember they featured a video of Earth-to-Earth transportation. And you could travel anywhere on Earth, if it's on the other side of the globe, if it's a long-haul destination, in under 90 minutes. And that really wowed me, that captivated me, and intrigued me to then go and learn a lot more about this company. And at the time, I really wanted to travel supersonic across the Atlantic, and cross the Atlantic in just under 3 hours, if possible. But I saw the video in 2017, and Concorde retired in 2003, so there was no chance of me flying supersonic. But this gave me the hope that eventually, not only will I be able to fly supersonic, I would be able to fly hypersonic at orbital velocity in space. And that's what intrigued me and made me follow this company. And now we're at the point where this company is going to go IPO. And I was weighing the pros and cons of whether I should at least start a position in this company on IPO day or the week thereafter, and dollar cost average into a position. And this video is just an exchange of some of my ideas, going through my ideas, my thesis. It's not necessarily dependent on the financials. I do understand that the price to sales ratio is incredibly high because you're going public at a valuation of 2 trillion almost, and the revenue is still in the tens of billions. But I do understand that we need to apply a premium to anything that Elon does, regardless of your sort of political view on him. I want to keep politics out of this conversation because I want to look at the technology. I want to look at the midterm to long-term potential of astronautics as it applies to the private sector, especially with SpaceX. Given that we are in this race to build AI infrastructure so that we can access, some would say still trying to access artificial general intelligence, I believe we're already there in my personal view, but artificial superintelligence, and that requires a tremendous amount of compute and inference build out. And although Earth makes sense, I think space and in orbit makes more sense. My initial reason was you've got limitless energy from the sun, as well as enough space to not encroach on anyone's real estate or anyone's resources. And that was my initial viewpoint. But given the recent events and the attack on Sam Altman's house and the general disdain towards artificial intelligence, it's not everyone, and it's probably not the people watching this channel, subscribe to this channel or watching this video. But I understand where people are coming from. This technology has become incredibly capable, and it is beginning to operate autonomously for longer than ever and conduct a lot of the white-collar tasks out there. And I've noticed this, I've introduced it into my workflow I was an initial adopter of ChatGPT 3.5 in November 2022. I think it was a week into its release. I started to use it and I saw the potential as a replacement technology for a lot of intellectual work. And that was back then. It's evolved so much. You can look at the ArcAGI benchmarks and how different benchmarks are being saturated in different domains, from coding, written work, logical reasoning, and mathematics. And I understand that there is an opposition to this technology. It makes sense as a human being. When there's a technology that has the potential to replace you, you do feel something. And especially with actors, and we saw in Hollywood what was going on when there were strikes as a result of AI being used to write scripts. And given the trajectory and how Dance 2, which is a text-to-video model, and also I believe it's an image-to-video model as well, is creating video and scenes and stories that are indistinguishable from reality, it's clear to see that there's something here. And people are starting to feel it. Automation-spurred mass unemployment is on the horizon. My initial thoughts as to why we should move AI infrastructure into space was because of state actors and any kinetic attacks on data centers within the continental United States and the rest of the globe. I even thought that there would be a military presence surrounding data centers to protect them, because they are of benefit to national security, especially as the US government becomes more entrenched in large language models produced by the frontier AI laboratories. However, I realized that maybe the human population, not everyone, but soon there's the potential for a lot of people to despise this technology. And we're starting to see it with the attacks on Sam Altman's house. I think that was the first instance that made me stop and think about this and why we should move this infrastructure away from Earth into space, so it's not encroaching on anyone's resources, visibly encroaching on anyone's resources, and anyone's real estate as well. Those are the two logical components as to why we should move this infrastructure to space, and it coincides with the SpaceX IPO. Also, another argument could be the Orwellian outcome of mass surveillance if we were to keep the AI infrastructure on Earth. And in order to protect it, not only would we have a military presence outside data centers and frontier laboratories, but we would have mass surveillance of the population to ensure that there are no attacks in the works or any plans of destroying the infrastructure. So I'm glad that this IPO is happening, and the technology in terms of the launch infrastructure and launch vehicles are being developed in order to move this technology, this infrastructure into Earth orbit. I think that's a good idea. And that's why the SpaceX IPO to me seems so promising, even after following the company for over 10 years, because I think everything seems to be coming together. Rather than the single terawatt data center or even multi-terawatts of compute in space, but only housed within a single space station, is probably not the way forward, given the Starlink constellation. And SpaceX has got used to developing 10,000 plus satellite constellations, and this could be applied to the AI data center build out in low Earth orbit, where you take that pre-existing approach and you apply it to a multi-terawatt data center constellation. And this could be considered a mega project. Even Starlink could be considered a mega project because it envelops the globe, and very difficult engineering and science is firstly keeping a lot of these satellites from colliding, but also teaching us a lot about routine launch infrastructure. And I think that's what Starship is going to bring. And one of the reasons I might not initially invest in the SpaceX IPO is because Starship is not commercially operational. It's currently in the research and development phase. And I do understand that vehicle could still be used internally in terms of the deployment of Starlink infrastructure in space. But what would convince me as a potential investor, even though I'm probably going to contribute a very minute percentage of capital in the grand scheme of things, I still want to be a part of the mission. But what would convince me would be a fully operational Starship that's launching at a cadence equivalent to the current Falcon 9 fleet, or launching even more often, such as the proposed hourly launch cadence. That would be incredible. And as long as the mass to orbit is going up year over year, which it is. So that would convince me to immediately invest in the IPO, but I might contribute a small amount of capital just to test the waters and experience the largest IPO in history and be a part of that history, but also experience the potential gain over the next 30 years to half century as AI infrastructure transitions to space, and the majority of the AI infrastructure that powers present-day large language models, as well as the future of the agentic revolution and artificial superintelligence, is within Earth's orbit. So really looking forward to that future. But I think this is just the beginning. And what this will teach us is it's an infrastructure mega project in Earth's orbit, but it's not the end goal. And once we establish a permanent presence in space regarding compute infrastructure, and majority of the inference and compute is taken off Earth and placed in Earth's orbit, all of that investment, the trillions upon trillions of dollars of investment, will now almost become trillions upon trillions of dollars in space investment. And you can just look at the long list of technologies that have been created out of solving difficult problems in space from public entities such as NASA. We have microcomputers, and there's so much more technology, pocket calculators, smartphones, cellular connectivity. Just imagine what would happen once we start to divert trillions of dollars of AI spend towards the space frontier. And that's what I'm most excited about. The next step would be in-space manufacture and fabrication. So we move the compute layer up into space. The next logical step is to move the manufacturing of microchips into space. And there is a chance that we will see a SpaceX-operated fabrication plant in space that is using ASML extreme ultraviolet lithography machines, as well as TSM manufacturing, but SpaceX will be that foundation layer that got the infrastructure into space and is now allowing other operators to build on that pre-existing infrastructure. It's almost as if SpaceX is to transport and orbital infrastructure as cloud computing is to the internet. It's providing that foundation on which multi and even deca-trillion-dollar industries can be built on. So there's space-based manufacturing, and then in addition to that, we're likely to see resource acquisition from the moon initially, and then the asteroids. So mining asteroids now becomes viable because we've not only shifted a tremendous amount of compute into space, we've now shifted an enormous amount of manufacturing infrastructure in space. And the next logical step is mining infrastructure, which will then fuel the production line of not only more compute, but potentially all heavy and polluting industry off Earth and moving it into space. This is the gateway. This can be thought of as an orbital AI infrastructure build-out, but also transitioning all heavy and polluting industry off Earth into space, so Earth becomes purely residential and also commercial in the white-collar sense. That also aligns very well with the Optimus humanoid robot and others such as Figures robots, Aptronics, Boston Dynamics into space, because they don't require the life support necessary to sustain humans. But you've got all this infrastructure in space. You've now got a automated blue-collar workforce to not only support the manufacturing and the build-out of the actual assets, as in the terawatt data center constellation, the manufacturing lines for chip manufacturing and fabrication, and the mining infrastructure. But through that build-out, you're also solving incredibly difficult problems, which, just like the public entities did, just like NASA, birthing all of this new technology, just imagine what that is going to bring us when it's fueled by trillions of dollars of government and enterprise investment. So once you divert trillions of dollars of AI infrastructure spend to the space economy, and you build out the compute and inference layer, then you build out manufacturing, and then resource acquisition, the next logical step would be in-space habitation, because you're going to have this growing population that's now benefiting from the fruits of AI. And although the human population won't expand exponentially, it would still be interesting to use these technological developments, the developments of new alloys and carbon-based nanotubes, to then, and anything that ASI would create, to then looking at building out. O'Neill cylinders could be next. So although I said Earth will become purely allocated to habitation, we can always move a portion of the civilization into Earth orbit as an insurance policy. But also, if you're interested in living and working in space and testing out hardware, perhaps not necessarily people that would work in space manufacturing, because a lot of that would be automated, but scientific discovery. I remember a while back when the Starlink constellation was being built out, and it was obstructing the view of the night sky of a lot of astronomers with ground-based telescopes. And I remember thinking to myself that Starlink is funding the research and development for the Super Heavy and Starship launch vehicle. And eventually, even though it is irritating right now, this will enable us to launch some of the largest telescopes into Earth's orbit, given the capacity that even the present day Starship has, even though it's not in commercial operation as of right now. There is that potential. That's extreme engineering. And engineering some of the world's greatest telescopes, such as the James Webb Space Telescope and also the Hubble, regardless if it's infrared or if it's visible light, in terms of its underlying technology, if we're solving very difficult problems in space and we are manufacturing extremely high tolerance equipment and then components in space, I see no reason why we can't develop some of the largest, most capable telescopes to observe the night sky and situate them in space, and then have the visiting astronomers that are operating that equipment sit in O'Neill cylinders. That's probably going to happen. And that's as a result of this, could be as a result of the SpaceX IPO, as well as the intersection with artificial intelligence and that AI compute build-out. So given that we will soon have tens of millions, billions, even trillions of tons of infrastructure in orbit, where the resources to develop that infrastructure were derived partially from Earth, but eventually mostly from asteroids and the moon. If we continue at this pace, or once we establish this foundation and we continue at that pace, we could reasonably see a Dyson cluster envelop the sun to harness its energy and then send that energy, probably via microwaves, to the AI compute infrastructure in space, the manufacturing, the habitation, as well as the addressing the power generation needs on Earth to sustain habitation as the industry is being brought into space. So it's almost realizing Jeff Bezos' vision as well of the space economy. And I never saw it coming. I never saw, personally, before the emergence of AGI, which I believe we have today, and before that, the release of ChatGPT, even during the days of AlphaGo and AlphaZero by Google DeepMind, I was following the technology not as closely back then, but I was aware of it. I still didn't think that we would hit these milestones and potentially hit Ray Kurzweil's milestone of AGI or ASI by, yes, it was ASI by 2029. We're on track. I remember Jeff Bezos proposed the idea that 2 university students in a dorm room could create a multi-billion-dollar space company. And I think that's possible, but not in the way that he initially thought. It's his perspective. I can't tell you what was going on in his brain at the time he reasoned through that idea. But I would have thought it would be something relating to manufacturing in space. But now I see that there will actually be many people with multi-billion-dollar companies in space, but not through manufacturing or resource acquisition, because that will probably be facilitated by a few. But it's that underlying AI compute infrastructure that will then create the multi-billion-dollar companies, just as cloud infrastructure does on Earth. So it's off-premises compute. And what you can do when you combine that with a very capable large language model that's beaming outputs back to Earth, especially if you have low latency connectivity, such as Starlink. And by that time, you have the laser link technology, not only with the Starlink constellation, but also between the compute infrastructure, the data centers in space, the manufacturing infrastructure, the in-space habitation, the resource acquisition, and the Dyson cluster. So I remember reading somewhere that we are not even a Type 1 civilization on the Kardashev scale. From everything that I've just discussed, I think we will reach that and surpass it. I understand we can't solely rely on the initial government and enterprise investment in the AI infrastructure build-out to sustain this new space economy. But given that a lot of hyperscalers, especially Anthropic, is currently starved of compute, it would be interesting to see if the capital expenditure is actually used to fuel the AI build-out. Just like how hyperscalers are purchasing GPUs off NVIDIA and also AMD, could we see hyperscalers start to lease a lot of the compute from SpaceX and their data centers in space eventually? But then SpaceX would be a client of NVIDIA and AMD, or even establishing partnerships with TSMC for data centers in space and ASML for their extreme ultraviolet lithography machines in space. There's a potential there. And although we will have limitless energy from the sun in space, at least before the initial construction on the Dyson cluster has commenced, moving small modular nuclear reactors into space. Perhaps it's time to develop the technology on a larger scale. And then after doing that, could we see the benefits of SMRs be brought back to Earth to power our civilization? So again, we have another benefit from the space economy that's being fueled by AI, is allowing AI to thrive. And then we also get to benefit from not only the technology produced as a direct result of artificial superintelligence, which will which is beyond my current comprehension. We also get to improve the infrastructure here on Earth as it relates to our increasing energy needs outside of AI infrastructure. And if this is the case, and we are in the position to develop hyper-efficient SMRs, could that bring down the cost of energy globally and uniformly? The price of energy is no longer at risk when there's a small regional conflict that's blocking the supply, because you've got SMRs that were developed in space and perfected in space, which have been brought back down to Earth or rebuilt on Earth to then support humanity's energy needs